Victor Hartwell, the CEO of one of the largest tech empires in the world, stood at the edge of his wife's grave, staring at the stone marker that bore her name. It had been 6 months since Lila Hartwell had passed away, and though he had continued to run his business with a sense of mechanical precision, a part of him had died with her. Lila had been his rock, the quiet force that balanced out his driven, ambitious nature. They had shared a life built on love, trust, and a shared vision of the future. But now, standing at her grave, Victor was left with nothing but questions. Had he ever truly known her? The silence between them had deepened in the months before her death. She had never been the type to talk about the things that bothered her, and in her final days, she had kept something hidden from him, something he had no idea about. Victor had thrown himself into his work after her death, consumed by meetings, deals, and the daily grind. He thought it was the only way to cope, but today, for the first time, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, the sky grayer. As he stood there staring at the grave, the thought of her seemed to hit him harder than ever before. He had missed something. There was more to their story that he had never been privy to. As he stood at the gravesite trying to remember the good times, the image of his wife's face flooded his mind. Her soft smile, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of the future. But now there was no future. Victor's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned, expecting to see a passerby, perhaps someone visiting a nearby grave. But what he saw left him standing in shock. Two young girls, no older than 10 or 12, were standing near his wife's grave, staring at the stone with expressions of deep sadness. Victor's heart skipped a beat as he observed them from a distance. Something about the sight of the girls, so small, so vulnerable, struck him in a way he couldn't explain. They were crying, not loudly, but with the quiet, heart-wrenching sobs that seemed to carry all the weight of grief. He felt a pang of discomfort as he watched them. Who were they? Why were they here, of all places? And why did they seem so familiar to him, as though their presence somehow connected to his own life? His mind raced as he tried to place them. Had Lila ever mentioned children? Had she been pregnant before? No. He would have known, wouldn't he? They had been married for years, and yet, something about this moment felt like a revelation. Victor took a step closer, unsure of how to approach. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to these two girls or why they were at his wife's grave, but something told him that this moment was important. Something that would answer the questions that had been tormenting him since Lila's passing. He took a deep breath and walked toward them, unsure of what to say. As he drew closer, the girls didn't turn to look at him. They simply stayed where they were, their eyes fixed on the gravestone, as though they were waiting for something. "Excuse me," Victor said softly, his voice hesitant as he neared them. The girls didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, he felt a wave of unease wash over him. Why wouldn't they speak? Finally, one of the girls looked up. Her face was streaked with tears, and her expression was a mixture of sorrow and something else, something Victor couldn't place. Recognition? Victor's heart raced. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice tight with confusion. The girl didn't answer right away. She simply continued to look at him, her eyes wide as if studying him. Then in a quiet, trembling voice, she spoke. You're our father, aren't you?" she said, her words catching in her throat. Victor's stomach dropped. "Father?" He took a step back, as though the ground beneath him had shifted. The world seemed to stop for a moment. The question lingered in the air between them, like an unspeakable truth that had just been revealed. "Father?" The other girl finally turned her gaze to him as well, her eyes filled with the same haunting sadness. "Mom told us you'd come," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She said you'd come for us." Victor was frozen in place, unable to process what was happening. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Twins? Layla had kept this from him? He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to do. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, his future, was suddenly thrown into question. These girls were his daughters, and they had been waiting for him. Victor stood frozen, unable to move, his mind racing. Twins? His daughters? The words felt foreign in his mouth, like a twisted puzzle piece he had never known existed. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the weight of the moment threatened to crush him. His eyes flicked back and forth between the two girls, each of them still crying softly by the grave, as if waiting for him to somehow make sense of it all. The girl who had spoken took a step closer to him, her eyes never leaving his face. "We've been waiting for you," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid her words would shatter the fragile silence between them. "Mom always said you'd come. She said you were just too busy, but one day, you'd come. She promised." Victor felt his knees weaken as he absorbed her words. Leela promised them? He had been so wrapped up in his world of business and ambition, he hadn't even noticed the life that was unfolding right under his nose. He had spent years building his empire, but none of that seemed to matter now. He had children. He turned toward the grave, the place where Lila had been laid to rest, the grave he had visited each week since her death. He had never once suspected this, a family hidden from him, a life he never knew he had. His chest tightened as a wave of guilt washed over him. How had he missed this? "Why didn't she tell me?" Victor asked, his voice cracking. The words seemed to escape him before he could stop them. He hadn't meant to ask aloud, but the question was consuming him. Why had Lila kept them hidden? The girl who had spoken earlier lowered her head, her face a mask of sorrow. "She didn't want you to be upset," she said quietly. "She didn't want you to feel torn between us and your work." Victor felt a lump form in his throat. Lila had protected him, thinking that keeping their children a secret would spare him the pain of having to choose between them and his empire. She had thought it would be easier for him to focus on his work, leaving her to raise the children alone. And yet all of this life he never knew about, had been waiting for him. "I don't understand," Victor whispered, shaking his head. His thoughts were spiraling, each one more confusing than the last. He turned to look at the other girl, who had been quiet until now, her small hands clasped in front of her, tears staining her cheeks. "Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she say anything?" The second girl looked up at him, her expression soft but full of sadness. "She didn't want you to feel guilty," she said softly. "She knew how much you loved your work, and she didn't want to force you into something you couldn't handle. She said she'd tell you when the time was right." Victor's heart ached with an unfamiliar pain. His mind screamed with the questions he couldn't answer. How could she have kept this from him? How could they have grown up without him? He took another shaky step forward, closing the distance between him and the twins, who looked up at him with wide, expectant eyes, as if they were waiting for him to step into the role they had always dreamed he would. "I don't know what to say," Victor muttered, overwhelmed by the enormity of the revelation. I I didn't know you existed. All these years, I never knew." His voice cracked with the weight of guilt and regret. "I never got to know you." The girl who had first spoken reached out, her small hand hesitantly touching his. "It's okay," she whispered. "Mom said you'd need time, but we've always known about you, and we've always been waiting for you." Victor stared down at her hand, the softness of it, the vulnerability in her voice. They had been waiting. The thought hit him like a physical blow. They had spent their lives without a father, without him, and yet they had still held on to hope that one day he would come. A swell of emotion overwhelmed him. How could he have missed them? How could he have missed his children, his family? His heart ached with the realization that he had missed out on their childhood, on the love they could have shared, on the connection that should have been there. The years of their lives gone. He took another deep breath, trying to steady himself, trying to push the overwhelming wave of guilt aside. There was no going back. All he could do now was move forward. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly, the words feeling too small to convey the depth of his regret. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to leave you." The girl smiled faintly, her hand still resting gently in his. "You're here now," she said, her voice steady. "That's all that matters." Victor nodded, feeling tears well up in his eyes. The future he had never imagined, was standing in front of him. His life, which had been centered around ambition and success, now had new meaning. It wasn't about deals and mergers or profit margins. It was about these two girls, his daughters, the family he had never known but now had to embrace. I'll make it right, he whispered, more to himself than to them. I'll make it right. And with that promise, Victor Hartwell began a new chapter in his life. A chapter he never expected, but one that would change everything. Victor stood still for a moment, taking in the enormity of the situation. He felt as if his entire world had shifted beneath him, leaving him off balance, struggling to find his footing. He had come to this graveyard, looking for closure, for some way to cope with Lila's death. Instead, he had found something that would change his life forever. Two children he never knew existed. The weight of everything he had just learned threatened to crush him. But there was something else, something deeper beneath his initial shock and confusion. A feeling he hadn't had in years. Hope. I never knew, Victor began, his voice shaking slightly. I never knew I had children. I never knew about you. I thought it was just me and Lila, and that was all there was. The first girl, the one who had spoken to him earlier, looked up at him with a soft, yet determined expression. We know, she said simply. Mom always said you were busy. She said you had a lot on your plate. But she never stopped loving you, Dad. We knew she was waiting for the right time to tell you. Victor swallowed hard. The guilt from her words hit him with full force. She had waited. She had waited for the right moment. But that moment had never come. And now his life was forever altered. He had spent so much time building his empire, focusing on work, thinking that success was the key to happiness. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered now were these two girls, his daughters. I didn't know, Victor whispered, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't know about you, about any of this. The second girl, who had been quiet until now, looked up at him. There was a gentleness in her gaze, a quiet understanding in her eyes. You don't have to apologize, Dad, she said softly. We've waited for you, but we know it wasn't your fault. We know you didn't know. Victor felt the weight of her words sink deep into his chest. He had spent years chasing something that had felt so important, but now it all felt like a distant memory. He was being pulled into a world that had always been waiting for him, a world he had missed for far too long. He sat down slowly, trying to collect his thoughts, trying to absorb everything that had been revealed to him. The cemetery had always been a place of mourning for him, a place where he could grieve Lila's loss. But now, as he sat there, surrounded by the children he never knew, he realized that the grief had taken on a new form. It wasn't just about Lila anymore. It was about them. I'm so sorry, Victor said again, his voice full of regret. I've missed so much time. I wasn't there for you. And I don't know how to make up for that. The first girl walked over to him, her small hand resting gently on his. You're here now, she said, a reassuring smile crossing her face. That's all that matters. We don't need the past, Dad. We just need you now. Victor looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. They were his children, and they were giving him a chance to be the father he had never been, to make up for the lost years. The second girl, a soft, hopeful smile on her face, added, We've waited a long time for you, Dad, but we know you're here now, and we're going to be okay. Victor couldn't help but feel the tears that welled in his eyes. How had he not known? How had he missed the chance to be there for them? But as he sat there, surrounded by the daughters he never knew, he felt something change inside him. This was his chance. This was the moment he could begin to make it right. For the first time in what felt like forever, Victor felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The pain of loss, the confusion, and the regret all started to dissolve. It wasn't too late. He could still be the father they needed. He could still be there for them, even though he had missed so much. I'm here now, Victor said firmly, his voice full of determination. I'll make it right. I promise. I'll never leave you again. The twins smiled, their eyes filled with a mix of relief and love. Victor reached out and pulled them both into a hug, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against his chest. In that moment, he realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about love, trust, and the promise to always be there for each other, no matter what. The sound of distant thunder rumbled overhead, signaling the arrival of a storm. But in that moment, the storm didn't seem so ominous. With his daughters by his side, Victor felt a new sense of purpose. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Victor stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the promise he had just made to his daughters. The rain began to fall more heavily now, but it didn't matter. The world around them seemed to fade away, and for the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't the man he had been before, the cold, ambitious businessman who had put everything above family. No, that man was gone. As he looked at the twins standing beside him, their faces still bright with hope, despite the sorrow that had brought them here, something shifted inside of him. The years he had lost with them could never be reclaimed, but he could still change the future. "We should go home," Victor said, his voice steady now, the uncertainty gone. The twins nodded, their faces lighting up, relieved that their father had finally accepted them. It wasn't just about moving on from the past. It was about building something new, starting fresh. The journey home was quiet, save for the occasional exchange between the twins, excited whispers about their new life with their father. Victor listened, his heart swelling with emotion. Every word, every little moment they shared felt like a small victory in the battle against the emptiness that had consumed him for so long. When they finally arrived at the house, the one Lila and Victor had shared, it felt like a different place. The rooms, once cold and empty, now seemed to hold the promise of something new. It wasn't the same without Lila, but it wasn't just his home anymore. It was theirs too. Victor led the girls inside, his mind racing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. There was so much he needed to teach them, so much they needed to learn from him. But it wasn't just about him imparting knowledge. It was about him learning from them as well. They had lived a life without him, but now they were together, and the bond they would form in the days and years to come would be stronger than anything he had ever imagined. "Do you want to help me with dinner?" Victor asked, trying to break the silence as he walked into the kitchen. The girls, their eyes bright with excitement, nodded eagerly. Together they cooked. They laughed. They spoke of the things they liked, their dreams, their fears. It was simple, it was imperfect, but it was everything Victor had been missing. The empty house suddenly felt full, not because of the things it held, but because of the family it now contained. After dinner, they sat together on the couch, the twins curled up next to him as they watched a movie. Something light-hearted, something that allowed them to forget the dark cloud that had hung over them for so long. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside there was warmth, there was love, and there was the unmistakable sense of belonging. Victor leaned back, his arm around both of the girls. He wasn't perfect. He knew that. He had missed so much. He had failed them for years. But the past was just that, the past. What mattered now was the future. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a chance at a real future. A future with his daughters, the family he had never known he had. As the night wore on and the twins slowly drifted to sleep beside him, Victor couldn't help but smile. He was finally home. They were finally together. And this was just the beginning.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.